All right, we're good to go. I have started the live stream and this round can begin. Thank you so much.
All right, is everyone ready?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm good. How's everybody?
Great. Thank you.
Welcome to the practice of law in the age of COVID, right? So, all right. So we have gotten the message to get started. If everyone is ready, are all the judges present and ready?
Ready to go.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to call the case of the Estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. I'm Paige McCormick. I'm the scoring judge. Now I'm going to ask everyone to keep your video and your audio muted until it is your time to speak. I'm going to ask you also to have your video set to hide all non-video participants. And that means you go down to video and make sure you click that setting. The only people on your screen right now should be the advocates and myself. And I'm going to ask all the attorneys to make an appearance. If you would do that now, starting with the plaintiffs.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. My name is Carlos Carroll, and I'm here with my co-counsel, Mr. Caden Cameron.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening.
And Ms. Anjali Shashidhar.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And we represent the plaintiffs today.
Thank you.
May the defense make appearances?
Please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Hattie Krivesky, and I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Ms. Malika John.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And Mr. Matthew Schreiner.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening.
Today, we are advocating on behalf of Mr. Harper Martini.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Thank you all for being here. All right, is everyone ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. But before we begin trial today, the plaintiff has some pretrial matters to attend to, if that's all right.
All right, is the defense ready to hear pretrial?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff may proceed.
Just to start, and for a bit of background for Your Honor and for the members of the jury, the estate of Genesis Petrillo is bringing a claim of battery against the defendant, Mr. Harper Martini. The estate alleges that on June 7th, 2019, the defendant poisoned a bottle of wine, then gave it as a gift to Ms. Petrillo, and then Ms. Petrillo died shortly thereafter as a result.
All right.
Now, Your Honor, our first pretrial matter is we move to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. The plaintiff has no party representative today.
All right, that will be granted.
Next, Your Honor, it is common in this jurisdiction for objections to be heard outside the earshot of the jury. Can we assume the same in your courtroom?
Yes, sure. Yes, it is.
Yes, Your Honor. Next, what are your preferences for us sharing our screen, sharing exhibits and demos? Would you like us to ask before each time we want to share, or would you like us to just go ahead and start sharing but preserve it for the record?
If you will just let me know before you share your screen, let opposing counsel know what you are that you're about to share your screen and what you'll be sharing, if you will do that, please.
Certainly, Your Honor. And also on that issue of screen sharing, can we assume that any evidence that is put up on the screen is constructively outside the view of the jury until you decide to admit it?
Yes.
Very well. And just so that you're aware, pursuant to stipulation 3, exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted, and the plaintiff does plan on using some of those exhibits during our opening statements.
All right, thank you.
Nothing further from the plaintiffs. We're ready for trial.
All right. Does defense have any pretrial matters to take up?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
For the purposes of this trial, we would like to note that under Rule 615, our party representative is Mr. Harper Martini.
All right, thank you.
And also at this time, I would like to draw Your Honor's attention to case law Deffendifer v. Schroeder, which is on page 3.
All right, thank you.
And also stipulation 17, which is on page 2, which states a canister of bug-off pesticide was also found in the same dumpster, which the Rapid River Police Department found exhibits 2A and 2B.
All right, thank you.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed with opening statements.
All right, thank you. All right, we're ready to proceed with opening statements. If everyone will make sure that they're in speaker view. All right, if plaintiff is ready to proceed, you may start with opening statement.
May it please the court. The defendant lost control. Genesis Petrillo lost her life. Members of the jury, I want you to keep those words in mind as you listen to today's trial. Because today, the evidence will show that the defendant, Harper Martini, lost control, and unfortunately, Genesis Petrillo lost her life. Genesis Petrillo was just hours away from getting married before she died of pesticide poisoning. Instead of walking down the aisle, Genesis Petrillo was in a hospital bed, dying. Instead of taking pictures with her fiance, spending time with her friends and family, Genesis Petrillo was fighting for her life. Today, you will hear that the defendant and Genesis Petrillo never had an easy relationship. The defendant's own daughter, Casey Soto, is going to come up here and tell you how Genesis and the defendant hated each other. They fought, they argued, they insulted each other constantly. But members of the jury, you will also see that up until a month before the wedding, that relationship did not turn deadly. Because members of the jury, today you will see that a month before the wedding, the defendant receives a phone call. In this phone call, you will see that Genesis promises to take Casey and move out of the country. You will also see in that very same voicemail that Genesis promises to the defendant that he will never see his future grandkids. A month before the wedding, the defendant loses control. Today, you'll also hear about how the defendant complains about Genesis. Just a few days after hearing that Genesis and Casey were getting married and planning on moving to France, you will hear how the defendant says that he's at his breaking point. Members of the jury, you will see what the defendant does next. Because today, we're going to show you a note, handwritten by the defendant, detailing his plan to threaten Genesis Petrillo. You will see how the defendant gives Genesis up until June 7th to leave Casey Soto. And if Genesis didn't do that, the defendant promises to take Genesis out the hard way. But today you will also hear that when June 7th comes around, Genesis and Casey were still getting married and still planning on leaving the country together. That's when the defendant realizes that he's running out of time to stop the wedding. You will hear today from the chef, Sam Arnold, about how the defendant was alone in the kitchen with a bottle of Cara wine and a pesticide can lying right nearby. You'll also hear that chef even asks the defendant about that canister of pesticide. And the defendant replies that it's to kill pests like Genesis. Members of the jury, when presented with the opportunity to stop the wedding, you will see that the defendant takes it. He pours the pesticide into that bottle of Cara wine. Now, we don't know if he meant to kill Genesis Petrillo or to simply harm her. But what we do know is that when the defendant poured that pesticide into that bottle of wine, he intended to stop the wedding at any cost. Today, you'll also hear from Dr. Kwan, the doctor who treated Genesis Petrillo on the night of her death. He's going to tell you how Genesis died of pesticide poisoning, resulting from drinking a bottle of wine contaminated with pesticide. You'll also hear that is the same bottle of wine that the defendant was found with earlier, alone in the kitchen with a canister of pesticide lying nearby. Today, as the plaintiff, we're pursuing a claim of battery against the defendant. Civil battery has 3 elements. First, an act by the defendant. Second, that the defendant intended to cause harm or harmful contact. And third, that Genesis Petrillo suffered harm as a consequence. We have to prove these 3 elements by a preponderance of evidence, or more likely than not, that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo. Now, members of the jury, at the end of trial today, if you have any lingering questions or doubts, that's okay. Because the evidence will show you that the defendant was running out of time, and unfortunately, Genesis Petrillo paid the consequences. No matter how hard we try, we cannot bring Genesis Petrillo back to life. Her fiance, Casey, is never going to have her wedding day back. But today, you have the opportunity to bring Genesis Petrillo justice. And after considering all the evidence that will be presented in trial today, we will ask you to find Harper Martini liable. Because the defendant was the one who lost control, but Genesis Petrillo lost her life. Thank you.
Thank you, plaintiff. Is defense ready to proceed with their opening?
Yes, Your Honor. Just to make sure everyone can hear me okay.
You're good on my end. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Members of the jury, may it please the court. False accusations and faulty examinations. Today's case is based on something that happened on the night of June 7th, 2019. But that night is part of a greater story, a story with complexity. Complexity the plaintiff seeks to erase. Months ago, a wedding was being planned, a beautiful union between 2 people truly in love, Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. This union was being supported by a number of people, one of which was Harper Martini, the father of Casey Soto. The planning process was imperfect. There were hiccups, mishaps, conflicts, disagreements, arguments, the like. But despite it all members involved continued to tread on, especially Mr. Martini, who knew how important this wedding day was for his daughter, Casey Soto, and would not let anything get in the way of that, even if it meant welcoming someone who he didn't always get along with into his family. And so Mr. Martini hatched a plan to bury the hatchet, to start anew. On the night of the rehearsal dinner, Mr. Martini would have a beautiful gift presented to Ms. Petrillo. And so he did. After presenting this gift, Mr. Martini gave a beautiful speech, one that was heartwarming and touched everybody who heard it. And it sparked excitement for the wedding day. But unfortunately, tragedy struck. Genesis Petrillo had slipped into a coma and lost her life. But something else interesting happened afterward, a rumor, a false accusation that Mr. Martini somehow had something to do with this horrific death. But this claim that Mr. Martini had any intent to harm Ms. Petrillo is unfounded and unjustifiable. And we will be showing that to you through the 3 witnesses we call to the stand today. First, you will hear from Harper Martini himself. He will explain why these false accusations are without merit, how his relationship with Ms. Petrillo was complicated. But the truth is, the arguments they had came from a place of concern and worry, not hatred. And the plaintiff will come and try to tell you there was poison in this bottle of wine because Mr. Martini put it there. But the reality is that there was pesticide in this bottle of wine because it was in a trash can surrounded by pesticide. Second, you will hear from Dr. R. Cannon, a decorated and experienced medical toxicologist who will go over all the possible theories as to why Genesis Petrillo is no longer with us today. He will discuss the faulty examinations on part of the plaintiff and how Dr. Kwan's immediate assumption that pesticide poisoning was the cause of death is on shaky footing. And also how, although there was pesticide in the bottle of wine, how the plaintiff completely ignores completely plausible explanation as to why that is. And finally, you will hear from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner who was intimately involved in pretty much all aspects of the wedding, and how Ms. Osborne saw Mr. Martini extend an olive branch to Ms. Petrillo, and how, despite being there for the process of planning, the wedding itself, and the rehearsal dinner, Ms. Osborne never saw any behavior to indicate any intent to harm on part of Mr. Martini. Members of the jury, we as the defense do not bear the burden in today's case. That solely rests on the plaintiff. They must prove several elements. First, that there was an act to harm by Mr. Martini. Second, that there was an intent to harm by Mr. Martini. And third, that Mr. Martini's actions are why, unfortunately, Ms. Petrillo is no longer with us. But members of the jury, the plaintiff will not be able to meet this burden. I ask you to pay close attention to the witnesses they call to the stand today. You will notice a common theme, that there is no evidence to indicate any act or any intent to harm Ms. Petrillo on behalf of Mr. Martini. And that's because there was none. Their false accusations and faulty examinations are why we are here in trial today. So that is why my Reiner comes before you and asks you not to find an innocent man guilty. He will also ask you to find Harper Martini not liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, plaintiff, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls
Ahead.
Casey Soto to the stand.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to switch to gallery view, please. All right, Ms. Soto, if you'll take the stand, please. And I'm assuming all witnesses have been previously sworn.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Good evening. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm Casey Soto.
Ms. Soto, are you testifying voluntarily tonight?
No, I don't want to be here today. I don't know who to trust, and I really wish I had just been left out of this.
Well, what happened?
My fiance, Genesis Petrillo, died after my dad gave her a bottle of wine.
I'm very sorry for your loss, Ms. Soto, but I do want to start by asking what your relationship was like with your fiance.
Genesis and I met 8 years ago, back in 2012. I remember at the time I thought I was never going to find someone, so I was surprised that when Genesis and I met, we actually hit it off.
Would you recognize a photo of Genesis Petrillo?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you, Ms. Soto. Would you recognize a photo of your fiance?
Yes, sorry, my internet stopped for a moment. Could you repeat your question?
Yes. Would you recognize a photo of your fiance?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, permission to put up Exhibit 1, a photo of Genesis Petrillo?
It's granted.
Now, Ms. Soto, can you tell the jury a little bit about what Genesis was like?
Genesis was just the best. You know, she was fun. She was loud. She was outspoken. She was one of those people that would just say whatever she thought, no matter what. And she was there for me even when things were really rough between my dad and me, even after we got engaged.
Who is your father?
Harper Martini.
So why would you say that things were rough between you and your father, Harper Martini?
My dad cares about me, but he can be a little bit controlling. So it took me a long time before I actually got the courage to introduce Genesis to him.
What happened when Genesis and your father first met?
Like I said, Genesis was outspoken. So when I brought Genesis home, my dad offered her a bottle of wine from his own winery, and Genesis asked, "Do you have anything classier?" And ever since then, my dad never liked her, even after Genesis proposed to me.
I actually want to talk about your engagement and your wedding a little bit now. Where did you and Genesis decide to have your wedding?
My dad convinced us to have our wedding and our dinner rehearsal at his winery.
So if the wedding was going to happen at your father's winery, how involved was your father with any of the planning?
He tried to be involved, but it was hard. Because Genesis and I kind of already knew what we wanted for our wedding, so Genesis and my dad would go back and forth for hours, and I never knew what to do. But it never got unbearable until about a month before the wedding.
What happened a month before your wedding?
Genesis and I decided to have a get-together with some of our friends. And looking back on it, I really thought that the night was going well, but I found out later that Genesis had sent my dad a voicemail.
And how did you find out that your fiance had sent your dad a voicemail?
My dad played it for me.
Would you recognize a transcript of that voicemail if I were to show one here today?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, permission to put up Exhibit 6, which has also already been pre-admitted.
Granted.
So, Ms. Soto, what did Genesis say in this voice message to your father?
She said, "I'm going to Paris after the wedding. You'll never see me again. Congrats. Oh, there is a catch, though. Casey's coming with me, of course. Casey doesn't want you to know, doesn't want to upset fragile little Harper or have you try to stop the wedding. It's time for Harper to be an adult and know the truth."
Objection. Cumulative evidence.
It's overruled.
I'm sorry, Ms. Soto, if you could just pick up where you left off.
Casey, me, our future kids, your grandkids, we are all going to live our lives as far away from you as possible. You'll never see any of us. You don't deserve us.
What did your dad tell you after he found out that you were moving to France?
Well, he told me that I had to stay with him, that I had to help him with his winery.
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled.
And what did your dad say to Genesis?
He told Genesis that he didn't care if Genesis ended up dead.
So after your dad told Genesis he didn't care if she ended up dead, did things get any better between them?
I didn't see anything. The day of the rehearsal dinner, Genesis told me that she was scared my dad was going to hurt her.
I actually want to talk about the night of your dinner rehearsal now, Ms. Soto. How was that night?
You know, looking back on it, it was nice, or as good as I could hope, I guess.
So did your dad do anything to try to fix things with Genesis?
I didn't see anything, but a couple hours into the rehearsal dinner, my dad gave Genesis a bottle of wine, and I had never seen it before, and I didn't really know where it came from.
What was the name of that bottle of wine?
The Cara wine.
Did your dad say anything when he gave this Cara bottle of wine to Genesis?
He said, "This is for you and only you."
And did you ever see Genesis actually drink from that bottle of wine?
I did, yes.
Ms. Soto, how did that night end?
Well, I was tired from everything that had gone on that day, and I was excited, for my wedding day. So I said goodnight to Genesis and I went to bed. But looking back on it, I really wish that I hadn't.
Why do you wish that you hadn't gone to bed that night?
That was the last time I ever saw Genesis alive.
Well, Miss Soto, what happened the next morning?
Well, I got up early for my wedding and I started getting dressed, and my dad walked into the room and he told me that Genesis was nowhere to be found and that we had to call off the wedding.
What happened next?
Well, I kept getting dressed because I assumed Genesis would just show up. But then my maid of honor ran into the room and she was wearing the same dress from last night, and she started talking really, really fast. And the only thing I remember even hearing was pesticide, Genesis, and coma. So we ran to the hospital and we got there too late. Genesis died at 9:27 a.m. and I was 5 minutes too late. And I never got to say goodbye.
Miss Soto, did you ever find out what happened to your fiance?
No. I don't know who to trust anymore, and I don't want to believe that my dad had anything to do with this, and I don't want to believe that my only parent could have done something like kill my fiance, but I don't know who to believe anymore.
Thank you, Miss Soto. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Hello, Ms. Soto. I'd like to talk to you about the, the wedding planning process. Mr. Martini asked you to change the venue from Rosie and Pedro's to Peony Estates, correct?
That's right.
And you agreed, right?
Yes, I did.
And recently, Mr. Martini had failed a health inspection, correct?
Yes, that's what that's what my dad told me, that they had a recent health inspection and it didn't go well.
And you would agree that your father needed some good publicity for Peony Estates, right?
I don't know. That's what he told me, yeah.
And he thought that having the wedding at Peony Estates could generate good publicity, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So you would agree with me, Ms. Soto, that it wouldn't be good publicity for someone to die at Peony Estates, right?
I would assume no.
And so your father was pretty involved in the wedding process, wasn't he?
Like I said, he tried to be, but I and Genesis already knew exactly what type of wedding we wanted. So he did try to be, but it was hard.
But he did sometimes take over things or control things, correct?
That's right.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'd like to talk about the rehearsal dinner. You saw Mr. Martini present a bottle of wine to your fiance, correct?
Yes, the Cara bottle of wine.
And then Mr. Martini gave a speech for Ms. Petrillo.
Yes, he did.
And you thought he sounded sincere, correct?
At the time, I hoped that it was sincere, and yeah, at the time it did sound sincere.
So that is a yes.
Yes.
And afterwards, you saw Ms. Petrillo pour some glasses of that bottle of wine, right?
I did.
And they were for her, right?
That's right. She drank it.
And afterwards, you went to bed, right? After the rehearsal dinner.
That's right.
And Ms. Petrillo stayed up with friends.
When I left, she was at the bar. I don't know what she did after, but when I left, it was about 10:15 p.m. and that's where she was.
So you don't know how much Ms. Petrillo may or may not have drank after you went to bed, right?
No, I had gone to bed.
You didn't see when the bottle of wine was finished, right?
No, she was just drinking from the Cara wine when I left, so I don't know.
And you didn't see Mr. Martini put poison into the wine, did you?
No, no, I didn't.
In fact, you never saw Mr. Martini with pesticide at the venue, did you?
No, I wasn't really, I wasn't at the winery that often, except for planning the wedding, and mostly we were focused on, the color of chairs and stuff like that. But
That's a no, right?
no, yeah.
In fact, you didn't even think your father would go as far as to hurt Miss Petrillo, did you?
At the time, I really didn't think that my father could do something like that. But right now, I don't know what to believe.
But you did not think that your father would go as far as hurting Miss Petrillo, correct?
Back then, I did not.
Is that a yes or a no, Ms. Soto?
That's it, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Plaintiff, you can call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we call Sam Arnold to the stand.
All right. Ms. Arnold?
Hi.
Good evening, Ms. Arnold. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. Hey, everybody. My name is Samantha Arnold, but you can like totally call me Sam. I mean, I feel like we're BFFs already.
What do you do for a living?
I'm like totally into food. You know, I started a YouTube channel in like 2015, and then overnight, this video of me making gourmet grilled cheese, it blew up. So I started this amazing catering company in Midlands.
And how are you related to today's case?
I actually catered the wedding at Peony Estates. The one where the bride like died.
Okay, let's talk about what you saw on the night of the rehearsal dinner. When was that?
It was on June 7th of 2019. I remember because I had to change my outfit literally 3 times that day.
And how did that day begin for you?
I woke up, I did my skincare routine, then I got to Peony Estates around like 11 just to finalize some last minute details. I looked around the winery for a little, but I could not find Harper.
Did you ever end up finding him?
Yes, I found Harper in the kitchen. I mean, like, understandably, I love a good kitchen.
What was the defendant working on in the kitchen?
Harper was working on this unreleased Peony Estates wine called Cara. And then I noticed a can of pesticides like right on the counter.
Miss Arnold, was there anybody else in the kitchen with Harper?
No, it was literally just Harper.
I want to give the jury a really clear picture. Are you telling us that Harper was alone in the kitchen with a Cara bottle of wine and a canister of pesticide?
Yes, for sure.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what you saw with the defendant while she was alone in that kitchen. Had you seen that bottle of Cara wine before?
No, which is like totally weird because I'm always shopping through Peony Estates wine cellar for the next best wine, you know?
Would you recognize a picture of that bottle of wine?
Oh, for sure.
Your Honor, permission to put up a picture of Exhibit 2?
That's granted.
Is this that bottle of Cara wine?
Yes, it is.
And is that the label?
Yes.
What did the defendant say about that bottle of Cara wine?
It was like a little bit weird. Okay, so Harper explained that the bottle of Cara wine was just for Genesis, right? But then Harper said that Genesis was getting something special that would take care of Harper's problems, like forever.
Now, earlier you mentioned a canister of pesticide. Did you ever ask Harper about that?
Oh, for sure. After I saw it, I immediately asked Harper what in the world it was doing there.
How did the defendant respond?
Oh my God, get this. Harper said to kill pests like Genesis.
After the defendant told you that the pesticide was to kill pests like Genesis, did you ever hear from him again that night?
Like just before the service for the rehearsal dinner, I went to the kitchen and then I heard Harper and Genesis yelling at each other.
What did you do after you saw the defendant and Genesis yelling at each other?
Well, I really don't like to get involved in drama, so I just decided it was best to leave.
Did you ever see Genesis get that care bottle of wine later on?
Yes. Towards the end of the night, Harper gave Genesis Petrillo the special bottle of Cara wine. But literally the whole time, Harper kept on repeating that it was for Genesis and Genesis only.
After emphasizing that that Cara bottle of wine was only for Genesis, did the defendant say anything else?
Harper said that Genesis should wait to drink the Cara wine until Genesis was totally alone. Like, that's so weird.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Hello, Miss Arnold. You're a caterer, correct?
Yes, and I have to say, I love your tie.
Thank you. You were hired to cater the wedding of Miss Petrillo and Miss Soto, right?
Yes, I was.
And you've worked closely with Mr. Martini in the past.
Oh, yeah.
And you owe a lot of your success to Harper Martini.
Yeah, that's true.
Harper, in your opinion, is very friendly, right?
For the most part, yeah, but I wouldn't want to cross Harper in this.
Your Honor, for improper character evidence under Rule 404.
Overruled.
Let me ask that question one more time. Harper, in your opinion, is very friendly, correct? Yes or no?
Yes, but I wouldn't want to cross her in business. He takes it very seriously.
Now, when you met with Mr. Martini in November, you went to Peony Estates itself, correct?
Oh, for sure. I always make sure to scope out the place where I'm having a little party.
And you mentioned that when you met with Mr. Martini, you saw that there was bug-off pesticide in the kitchen, right?
Yes.
And then Harper put...
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Relevance, Your Honor. Mr. Schreiner is referring to an incident that happened over a year before the date in question. Whether or not the pesticide was in the kitchen is not relevant.
All right. I'm going to ask defense to restate your question.
Yes, Your Honor. At that point in time, Harper Martini took the bottle and then brought it into the bottling area afterwards, correct?
Am I allowed to answer now?
Any further?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I couldn't hear you.
Any further objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to, again, relevance. Whether or not this canister of pesticide was brought into the kitchen over a year before June 7th, the date in question, does not make any fact in today's case more or less likely. It's not relevant.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. And you mentioned that the Peony Estates kitchen had that bottle of pesticides, just to confirm, correct? It was in the kitchen.
Yes.
And on the several occasions that you've been in the Peony Estates kitchen, you've noted that it's never really organized, right?
No, not at all.
Under Rule 403, this is substantially more misleading than it is probative. Talking about whether or not there are pesticides or how the kitchen was kept on previous incidents is misleading the jury to believe that this is perhaps a negligence case as opposed to a battery case, which is what we're dealing with today.
That's overruled.
You mentioned on, I'm sorry, let me move on from that. You arrived at Peony Estates on June 7th at around 11 a.m., correct?
Yes, I did.
Right. And the kitchen was disorganized then, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Chaotic even?
Yeah.
And while you were there, you saw the bottle of Cara wine in the kitchen again, right?
I did. It was the special bottle of Carowine. Yeah.
Right. And Mr. Martini said that that bottle was for Genesis.
Yes. It was so weird. Like only for Genesis.
And he said that he hoped it would take care of their problems forever.
Yes. How weird is that?
And you were the one who gave that bottle of wine to Mr. Petrillo, correct?
Yes, because Harper like instructed me to. I kid you not, 1.5 million times.
But you were the one who handled that bottle, yes?
Yes, because Harper told me to.
Right. And just to be clear, you never saw Mr. Martini put pesticides into that bottle of Cara wine, correct?
No, but I also wasn't with Harper the whole time, but I didn't see that.
Let me direct you back to my question. That is a no, correct?
No, that's a no.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. Plaintiff may call their next witness.
Your Honor, at this point, the defense calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Thank you. Dr. Kwan?
It's nice to see you again, Dr. Kwan. Can you introduce yourself to the jury real fast?
Of course. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Jimin Kwan. It's nice to meet you all.
Now, Dr. Kwan, what do you do for a living?
Well, I started my career off as a college professor. I was fun in the beginning, but then I quickly realized that my talents really pushed me towards the medical field. So I went back to school, completed my residencies and fellowships, and now I'm so proud to say that I'm currently the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital, right here in Midlands.
Do you mind telling the jury a little bit about your education?
Of course. I received my BS in biology from Georgia Tech, and then I went on to get my medical degree at UNC Chapel Hill, where I specialized in medical toxicology.
Forgive me if this is a silly question, but what do you do as an emergency physician?
So my day-to-day consists of me working quickly to diagnose patients and treat various cases ranging from suspected alcohol poisoning all the way to suspected homicides. I like to consider myself quite the detective in the medical field.
Now, what methods do you use as an emergency physician?
Well, I typically use the START method. It stands for Standard Triage and Rapid Treatment. You could essentially think of it as a way to pre-diagnose a patient before actually treating them. It's used by every doctor in our field, and it's a standard reference in our field as well.
Now, what kind of materials do you need to perform this START method?
Well, I would need access to the patient, of course, along with any toxicology and laboratory testing reports as well.
Dr. Kwan, I want to talk about why you're here today. Now, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I was actually the physician on site who treated Genesis Petrillo, the victim, on the night of her death. Then, because her death became a suspected poisoning, I was also asked to prepare a report for today's case.
Did you use the START method when Genesis came into your ER?
Yes, of course.
And did you have the materials that you needed to perform the START method?
I did.
And did you apply the START method reliably to the facts and data?
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Kwan, let's break down how you determine the cause of death. Did Genesis Petrillo's symptoms reflect pesticide poisoning?
They did. You see, the first step in my START method is the triage phase. And that's exactly what we look for, symptoms in the patient. So she exhibited symptoms such as nausea, contracted pupils, and a slowed pulse. And all those symptoms line up with the symptoms of pesticide poisoning.
Did the progression of symptoms match the expected progression of pesticide poisoning?
Yes, absolutely. So over time in patients who are suspectedly poisoned, you would expect that there would be visible digestive symptoms, such as vomiting, which would then lead to sweating, contracted pupils, and a slowed pulse. All the symptoms that the patient herself exhibited. In very serious cases, much like this one, patients may also experience nervous system failure. And in Genesis Petrillo's case, all the toxins in her system caused her to experience nervous system failure. And
Objection, Your Honor. Narrative.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Sustained. Sustained. Ask your next question.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, besides their symptoms, were there other ways that confirmed possibly how Genesis died from pesticide poisoning?
There were. So while I was fairly confident in what I found just based on the symptoms that Genesis exhibited, I also wanted to be thorough and conduct a full toxicology screening. So,
Dr. Kwan, I'm going to stop you right there. What was the results of that screening real fast?
so based on those results, I actually found varying levels of pesticides within Genesis's body, specifically within her bloodstream. And that alone was particularly alarming for me.
Now, why was this alarming to you?
Well, it was alarming because this was no longer just a suspected pesticide poisoning on my part. There were actual pesticides that I found in her blood. So that meant I quickly had to go to the next step of my START method, rapid treatment. And I tried to check to see how she may have ingested it. And that's when I found trace amounts of wine contaminated.
Objection, Your Honor, again to narrative.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, what made you suspect that there was in fact pesticides within Genesis Petrio's blood?
So the main reason why I was suspecting that there were pesticides found in there were just based on the symptoms that she exhibited, as well as a toxicology report that I got back as well.
Dr. Kwan, were you the one who wrote the death certificate of Genesis Petrio?
Yes, I was.
Your Honor, permission to display exhibit number 7, which is the death certificate of Genesis, to the screen?
That's granted.
Now, did you write specifically how Genesis Petrio died on this death certificate?
Yes. So if you see on this death certificate right here, I tried to include that her cause of death was due to respiratory failure because of organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Thank you. Now, based on the entirety of your treatment, how do you believe that Genesis Petrio died?
So I can conclude that on the evening of Genesis's wedding rehearsal, the most likely cause of death was the ingestion of contaminated wine from Peony Estates.
Thank you for your testimony. Your Honor, we pass the witness.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Go ahead.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you are on the board of directors for Doctors for Organic Solutions, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
And this group advocates against the use of pesticides, correct?
That's true.
You don't think pesticides are necessary?
Yes, and I personally also believe that they're actually harmful to the environment as well as the people who may inhale it or ingest it as well.
And you don't believe in using pesticides for pest control, correct?
Yes, exactly. I believe that there are more organic solutions that we could use as opposed to chemical solutions to pesticide problems.
Dr. Kwan, you know that Peony Estates is near a swamp, correct?
That's true.
And you know that swamps attract bugs.
Yes, I do.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion.
Overruled.
Dr. Kwan, re-asking my question, you know that a swamp would attract bugs, right?
Yes, that's true.
And so Peony Estates would need to use pesticides to ensure there were no infestations on their property, right?
Yes, that's also true.
Now, moving on, I'd like to talk about when you examined Miss Petrio in the ER.
Okay.
Miss Petrio had slurred speech.
She did, yes.
She was showing signs of stomach pain.
She was.
She was vomiting.
That's true.
She was even breathing slower, right?
Yes.
And you initially thought that Miss Petrio was intoxicated, correct?
Yes. Throughout my job on the daily, I get tens of patients coming in who had a little bit too much to drink the night before. So when Genesis came in, just looking at the symptoms that she was exhibiting, I had originally treated this case as an alcohol poisoning case. And then that's when I noticed some more symptoms that made me change my mind.
Well, Dr. Kwan, I'm not asking you about other cases. I'm just asking if you found Genesis symptoms to be consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Yes, so some symptoms that she was exhibiting were consistent with alcohol poisoning.
And after noticing these symptoms, you admitted Miss Petrio into the hospital, correct?
Yes, exactly. I wanted to conduct a full examination of her. And as I said, that's when I started my START method to try to see what was the problem here.
You thought that Ms. Petrillo was then suffering from organophosphate poisoning, right?
Yes, and that was shortly after conducting my examination of her. So as I mentioned before, I originally thought this was an alcohol poisoning case. Then she started exhibiting symptoms that are only found in patients who have consumed organophosphate pesticides.
Well, Dr. Kwan, organophosphate poisoning is pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, it is.
And the only way to know this is by looking at levels of acetylcholinesterase in the bloodstream, right?
Exactly, that's true.
And-
You would do well in medical school.
And just to be clear for the members of the jury, acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme, correct?
Yes, it's important for the function of our nervous system.
And enzymes can actually be lowered by having other drugs in your system, right?
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened in this case. After getting some lab report tests back, I noticed that Genesis had low acetylcholinesterase levels in her blood system, which means that that's a telltale sign of organophosphate poisoning.
And Dr. Kwan, a person can be poisoned by organophosphates through skin contact, right?
That's true.
And now, Dr. Kwan, you read Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, correct?
I did.
So you know that she also drank the same car wine that Genesis had consumed.
That's actually not true, no.
It's not true that Miss Rodriguez drank the same wine as Genesis?
Yes, she never drank the wine. She put the wine in her mouth and then immediately spit it out after. So no wine was ever ingested in that case.
Yes, but Dr. Kwan, Miss Rodriguez had the wine in her mouth, correct?
She did.
It was touching her skin,
It was touching the inside of her mouth, yes.
which is skin, correct?
The skin is on the outside of the body, not the inside.
Well, isn't it true that in small doses, organophosphates can be lethal?
In small doses, organophosphate poisoning can potentially be lethal. Yes.
Now, going back to Ms. Petrillo, you ordered her to have an antidote for organophosphate poisoning, correct?
That's true.
And you knew that it needed to be administered quickly?
Yes.
But Ms. Petrillo unfortunately fell into a coma.
She did, yes.
And Dr. Kwan, you had already given Ms. Petrillo the antidote before she fell into that coma, correct?
I did, but unfortunately the antidote didn't actually have enough time to take effect because, as you just mentioned, she slipped into a coma and she later passed away.
Dr. Kwan, you don't know who is at fault for Ms. Petrillo's death, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. I have no clue what happened.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Yes, judicial oversight. I did not ask previously if anyone wanted redirect. So I'll give you this opportunity to redirect. My apologies.
No worries, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, I just have one question for you. Did Miss Petrillo die from alcohol poisoning or pesticide poisoning?
No, I can absolutely conclude that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning, not alcohol poisoning.
Thank you. Your Honor, we pass the witness.
All right. Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. And as I did not give the opportunity earlier, would the plaintiff like to recall any witnesses for any redirect with the time remaining? I'll throw that opportunity out there to plaintiff's attorneys.
No, Your Honor. I did not have any redirect planned, and I don't
apologize.
No, that's totally fine, Your Honor.
All right. Does plaintiff have any additional witnesses?
Your Honor, if we don't have any redirect, then the plaintiff will rest our case.
Thank you. All right, I believe we'll take a 5-minute break at this point before defense has the opportunity to begin their case. So timekeeper, if you'll start the break. All right, are we all back from break? All right, do we have Judge Koenig and Judge Ritchie? Y'all with us?
I'm
Yes.
here, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
You're welcome. I'm glad I got close. All right, is defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first witness.
We now call Harper Martini to the stand.
All right. Mr. Martini?
Good afternoon.
Good evening, Mr. Martini. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Harper Martini.
Can you tell us more about yourself?
I was born in Napa Valley, and I moved to Midlands to study horticulture and business. After I graduated, I toured the world and I visited all the famous wineries. While I was touring, I met my wife. Unfortunately, she passed away, but not before we had our beautiful daughter, Casey, together.
You mentioned Casey. Can you tell us more about her?
Yeah, Casey's a really good kid. She has a really big heart, you know. She always takes care of those who are less fortunate than her. We had a really perfect relationship. The only time we never disagree about anything was about our future with Genesis Petrillo.
Why did you disagree about their future?
Casey's a really good kid. And when Genesis came into her life, she started to make some bad decisions. I don't necessarily think Genesis is a bad person. I just don't think she's a good influence on my daughter.
What was a time that made you think that?
I was having a party at my vineyard, and Genesis dared Casey to drink a glass of all of our signature wines. My daughter had alcohol poisoning and had to be rushed to the hospital. She nearly died.
Did you ever raise these concerns to Casey?
Of course, all the time. But Casey's young, and the heart wants what the heart wants, you know? So for her, I decided to bury the hatchet.
How did you try to bury the hatchet?
I organized a congratulatory dinner or party for their engagement. And at the dinner party, I invited Genesis out to lunch so we could talk about our differences and hopefully put it under the rug.
I'd like to talk about that lunch, actually. How did it go?
It went well at first. I congratulated Genesis on proposing to my daughter, and I said as a token of my good graces, I will hold the wedding at Peony Estates. From there, it started to go downhill when Genesis told me that her and Casey were going to leave to France after the wedding. It upset me a little bit.
Why did it upset you?
Casey's got winemaking in her veins, you know, like me. She's always got good ideas for new types of wines or how to help people who have dietary issues. But regardless of my misgivings, I decided to help plan the wedding.
And why did you do that?
Well, I had a conversation with Casey, and I realized that she had the same type of connection with Genesis that I had with my late wife. And I know my parents didn't really approve of our relationship, and I didn't want to be that type of parent. So I decided to plan the wedding for her.
I'd like to talk about that. What were your wedding plans?
I hired an official wedding planner, Blair Osborne, and I hired a caterer, Sam Arnold. I still wasn't 100%, but I was slowly convincing myself as time went on. And what were you gonna say?
And can you elaborate a little bit more on what else you did?
Yes. So for the wedding rehearsal is I needed something that would really fix our relationship, right? So I decided to prepare a final peace offering to give to Genesis.
What was that peace offering?
The peace offering was this unreleased brand of Carl wine I'd been preparing for the past year or so. I knew it was similar in taste to other wines that Genesis enjoyed, so I thought it'd be the perfect gift to fix our relationship once and for all.
And where did you present this gift?
I gave it to Sam Arnold, who was to present it at the rehearsal during my toast.
How was this toast received?
Well, I got up there and I apologized, first of all, and I told some jokes, and I had Sam present the bottle. Afterwards, Casey, she smiled at me, and she made a little heart with her hands, and at that point, I considered the matter to be resolved. And it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. For the first time after ever meeting Genesis.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I objected to narrative.
Sustained.
Moving on, Mr. Martini, what happened on the wedding day?
Around 2:30 in the morning, I received a call from one of my employees that someone on the property had been rushed from Peony Estates to the hospital.
Do you know who that person was?
I asked my employee, but they didn't know. I suspected Genesis because I had seen her drinking a lot earlier in the night, and it wouldn't be the first time she's had alcohol poisoning.
And what steps did you take next?
Well, I rushed to her room to see if she was okay, but she was gone, and all that was left was that Carl wine bottle I had given her earlier in the night. And regrettably, I threw it away because it was empty. I didn't know that someone was going to accuse me of poisoning my daughter-in-law.
We've heard that Miss Petrillo was poisoned. Do you know how the wine could have been contaminated?
We use a lot of pesticides on our property.
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Moving on, Mr. Martini, where was this bottle of wine placed? What did you do with it?
I threw it out in this big trash can behind the property, which is the same trash can where I throw away all of our pesticides and anything along those lines.
So the wine and the pesticides were in the same trash can?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for the pesticide bottles when they're thrown away to leak. That's why I feel really bad that I threw away the wine bottle, because I basically threw it into a puddle of pesticides.
Mr. Martini, what is your response to the allegations that you poisoned Genesis Petrillo?
I've been falsely accused. Why would I give a bottle of wine like that to Genesis, knowing that my own daughter was sitting there and would be drinking from it? Plus, Genesis and Casey were family.
Objection, Your Honor, to more prejudicial than probative. This is the defendant, them asking, why would I poison Genesis Petrillo? Doesn't have any probative value in today's case. It's simply prejudicial.
Overruled.
Continue on, Mr. Martini.
As I was saying, Casey and Genesis were family to me. I would never do anything to harm family. I loved both of them.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, I'm sure you gather by now that I represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo in today's case.
Yes.
Now, you were here when your daughter testified just a second ago, right?
Yes.
And she told us about a voicemail that Miss Petrillo had left for you on May 12th. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Now, May 12th, that was less than a month before the planned wedding, right?
Yes.
Now, in this voicemail, Miss Petrillo threatened to take Casey away and not let you see her future grandchildren, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It hurt a little bit.
Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a nice thing to threaten, but you'd agree with me that Miss Petrillo's comments didn't come out of the blue.
That's correct. There was a build-up to it, yes.
That's right. You and she never had a good relationship in the first place.
No, I didn't think she was a good influence on my daughter.
And that May 12th voicemail she left for you only came after years of attempts by you to break up Miss Casey and Miss Petrillo.
Yeah, I really wanted to take care of my daughter, and that memory of her getting alcohol poisoning would wake me up at night, and I just wanted to take care of her. And
now, Mr. Martini, let's talk about what you said just 3 days after you got this voicemail from Genesis. Now, it's fair to say that you made some pretty harsh statements about Genesis Petrillo.
In the past, I've said some mean things about her. That's correct.
Right, and one of these things includes Genesis is like a cellar pest. They need to make a Genesis pesticide. I'd buy that.
Yeah, I have a fairly dark sense of humor. My parents didn't approve of it. My teachers didn't approve of it. Let me be honest, no one approves of it. So, but I wouldn't do anything to anyone. I want that to be clear.
Mr. Martini, you also said, I swear only one of us will survive this wedding, didn't you?
What time? I'm sorry.
Well, this was in one of your voice messages to Danny Francasio.
I may have said something along those lines. That's correct. I was pretty stressed about the wedding.
Mr. Martini, just 3 days after you received the voice message from Genesis, you said, miserable, selfish Genesis, I've had enough. I'm beyond the breaking point. It's going to be me or Genesis, not both of us.
I was pretty stressed. Of course, I never do anything about it.
No, actually, Mr. Martini, I want to talk about how you actually threatened Genesis Petrillo. Now, in response to what Genesis had told you, you threatened her, didn't you?
No.
Well, Mr. Martini, would you recognize a note that you wrote to Genesis if I were to show it to you?
Probably.
Your Honor, at this point, maybe display exhibit number 24.
You may.
Now, Mr. Martini, this is the note that you wrote to Genesis, isn't that right?
Yes, that looks like it.
Your Honor, at this point, the plaintiff offers exhibit number 24 into evidence.
Does defense have any response?
No, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
Now, you told Miss Petrillo that if she didn't leave Casey, you would take her out the hard way, right?
Yes, if she hurt my daughter, I was planning legal action against her. I'd been planning legal action for a handful of years because of the alcohol poisoning she gave my daughter.
And you would agree that you gave her a deadline of the 7th?
Yes, she had to say she was pulling out of the wedding by then, because if I canceled the wedding on that date, I'd get my money back. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
Now, it's fair to say that by June 7th, they were still together.
That's correct. That's the day of the wedding reception or rehearsal.
In fact, Genesis threw the note at you and stormed off.
Yes, she did.
And that's actually why the note's all crumpled up, because she crumpled it up and threw it at you.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Martini, let's talk about what happened on June 7th. Now, you remember walking into the wine cellar, right?
Yes.
You grabbed a bottle of Cara wine?
Yes, our new brand of wine.
You brought it into the main kitchen?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Martini, did you think you were alone when you got into the kitchen, or did you see Sam Arnold watching you?
I believe I saw Sam Arnold out of the corner of my eye at the time, but I didn't really make a connection to it.
So, Mr. Martini, there was no reason that you were surprised when Sam Arnold said that you were working on a bottle of Cara wine with pesticides on the counter?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised, because it's kind of a health violation to have pesticides in your kitchen.
That's right. Mr. Martini, you were aware of how dangerous pesticides could be.
Yeah, our Peony Estates has made some mistakes in the past where our employees have accidentally drank pesticides before, or drank it, they got into wine, I should say, during our pesticide sprayings.
Now, Mr. Martini, you would agree with me that you wouldn't need to pour out much to cause some serious harm.
Yeah, we had a pesticide spraying on the property a year or so ago, and it got into a glass of wine, and one of our employees drank it and got pretty sick. Unfortunately, that happens from time to time.
And you need to pour out even less if you're just trying to, give Genesis stomachache.
Yes, I guess it would depend on the amount.
Now, you'd agree that you wanted this bottle to only go to Genesis, isn't that right?
Yes, it was my present to Genesis.
Now, Mr. Martini, I want to talk about something that happens a little bit later. Now, around 2:30 in the morning, you heard that someone was in the hospital.
Yes, that's correct. I suspected Genesis because of other times I've seen her get very sick from consuming a lot of alcohol.
Well, and as you mentioned on direct examination, the caller never mentioned any names.
No, the caller didn't mention any names, but I suspected Genesis because of past experiences.
Now, it's true that it could have been anybody from the wedding that got sick.
It could have been, sure, but I've never had a significant past experience where they've been rushed to the hospital because they drank too much.
Mr. Martini, it's fair to say that you knew it was Genesis Petrillo.
I didn't know it was Genesis Petrillo. I suspected it was Genesis Petrillo.
Now, Mr. Martini, when asked, what did you do next? You stated in your deposition that you went to Genesis' room.
Yeah, I wanted to see if my daughter-in-law was okay.
Oh, this is what really surprised me. After going into the room, you decided to start cleaning the room, didn't you?
Yeah, there was an empty bottle of car wine sitting on the floor, and well, it's empty. There's no use for it, so I threw it away. Now I wish I had kept the bottle. I didn't even think that I'd be throwing it into a pool of pesticide in the trash.
You never even thought to go check on your own daughter. You just picked up this bottle and threw it in the trash, right?
Because I thought the person that was sick was Genesis. That's why I checked on them. I don't know why I'd need to check on my own daughter.
I want to talk about something you did actually before you threw the bottle away. You ripped off the label, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct.
And by ripping off the label, no one could tell what kind of bottle it was.
Yeah, the labels are recycled and the bottles are thrown away. But yes, you couldn't tell what type of wine it was.
And now, Mr. Martini, part of you is relieved, even happy, that Genesis is no longer in our lives.
I'm happy on a business aspect per se. Genesis had this joke where she would tell guests that the food that we served was freeze-dried remains from the Apollo missions, and it turned away a handful of guests. So you could say I'm happy that she's not telling guests that I'm going to make them sick.
Mr. Martini, let me redirect you back to my question. Part of you is relieved, even happy, that Genesis
Objection
is no longer
relevance.
Could you state that again? Would you restate your objection?
Oh, sorry, Your Honor.
okay.
At this, yes, objection relevance.
Overruled.
Mr. Martini, let me repeat my question one more time. You would agree part of you is happy, part of you is relieved, even happy, Genesis is no longer in your lives.
I'm terribly sad that Genesis isn't in our lives. I loved her and I love Casey. Sure, a business part of me may be a little happy that Genesis is gone, but more so than that, I'm incredibly devastated by what happened to Genesis. And I want to offer my condolences to her family and to my daughter.
Your Honor, we pass the witness.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Right. Defense may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
All right. Dr. Cannon?
Oh, hello. Sorry.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello. My name is Rex Cannon.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a medical doctor with expertise in toxicology and pharmacology.
And why are you here today?
Well, I'm currently serving as a consultant at Gardner Consulting and was called to testify on my findings of the report by Dr. Jimin Kwan.
And have you ever been called to testify before?
Yes, I've testified in over 35 legal cases.
And as a consulting medical doctor, what do you do specifically?
Sure. I look over any medical findings in the case and give a second objective take on what happened, in this case being the cause of death.
And how did your educational background prepare you for your line of work?
Yeah, I went to The Ohio State University with a BS in chemistry, attended Harvard Medical, graduated summa cum laude. I then took a faculty position at Midlands Medical School, taught on toxicology for a few years, and subsequently left Midlands in academia to become an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting Incorporated.
Have you ever been published in your field?
Yes, I've published over 50 articles in my field on toxicology, medicine, and treatments.
Now, how did you become involved in today's case?
Well, from my firm, I received and was able to review the report of Dr. Kwan, as I said previously, and specifically I was tasked with looking at what Dr. Kwan found to be the cause of death, any alternatives, along with valuing any connection between Peony Estates wine in relation to said cause of death.
And did you have sufficient materials to come to a conclusion?
Yes, I was able to review Petrio's toxicology, scans of blood and stomach contents, the sample from the wine bottle, the Midlands alcohol impairment chart, Dr. Kwan's report, and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
And what are your methods in reviewing these materials?
Well, I use comparative analysis, which is standard in my field of consulting, along with looking for affirmative and negative evidence in relation to that.
Now, could you explain to the jury what affirmative and negative evidence means?
Sure. Affirmative evidence just means that the evidence points to a specific conclusion, whereas negative evidence is evidence that isn't able to rule out alternative conclusions.
And also, what is comparative analysis?
Well, comparative analysis is simply looking at a case, comparing what we know as fact to what was reported in the given materials, and then drawing conclusions and ruling out possibilities and opening alternative explanations.
And did you reliably apply both these methods to today's case?
Yes, of course.
Is this method standard in your field?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to talk about your findings. What did your analysis tell you?
Well, the facts of this case seem to be consistent with some form of organophosphate poisoning. However, there are several alternative possibilities that simply can't be ruled out.
What are some of these alternative possibilities?
Well, one of them is what Dr. Kwan initially found, that being high blood alcohol concentration, that could have been the cause of death.
Could you expand on what high blood alcohol concentration means?
Sure. As noted by Dr. Kwan, Patria's BAC test in the hospital was 0.16%, as consistent with the symptoms she was exhibiting, sorry. And it's unlikely that a peak BAC of 0.16% could lead to death. However, we don't know what Patria's peak BAC was that night.
And why do we not know what Ms. Trio's peak BAC was?
Well, I learned from Ms. Rodriguez's affidavit that Patria consumed no alcohol after 12:42 a.m. However, because Patria had been drinking that previous evening...
Please continue.
I'm sorry, would you restate your objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I said objection under Rule 801, this is hearsay. He's referring to an affidavit that isn't his own.
Does defense have a response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan is reviewing, as he stated previously, he is reviewing the affidavits of Ms. Rodriguez's affidavit. These were materials that he was allowed to use to come to a conclusion in today's case.
Your Honor, that is... Yes, Your Honor.
Plaintiff have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. I was going to say that is still hearsay. He's still referring to out-of-court statements, an entire affidavit by a different witness that wasn't even called today. They're using this expert to factor in hearsay. If I could turn your attention to case law, Mississippi Barbecue, it talks about how experts cannot be used as conduits for hearsay. And that's exactly what opposing counsel is doing by having Dr. Cannon elicit testimony from an affidavit of a witness who wasn't even called today.
Do you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. These statements are an exception to the rules against hearsay underneath 803.4. This statement is made and it's being used to explain a medical diagnosis or treatment and is therefore an exception to hearsay.
Your Honor, these statements weren't directly made to Dr. Cannon. They were just read in an affidavit. They weren't used for any medical diagnosis.
Right, thank you. I'll allow the testimony.
Now, Dr. Kwan, going back to your conclusions, why do we not know what Ms. Patria's peak BAC was?
Well, as I said, Patria had been drinking that evening, and when they arrived at the hospital, their body would have already metabolized most of the alcohol. So it's impossible to really know what Patria's peak BAC was that night.
And how do you determine a person's BAC?
Well, I actually brought along a chart that is used by medical doctors in Midlands to determine this very thing.
Well, Dr. Cannon, I would like you to look at that chart, Exhibit 23, which you should have in front of you. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
And what are you looking at, Dr.
The Midlands alcohol impairment chart.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of alcohol impairment?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 23 into evidence and permission to publish to the screen.
Plaintiff, do you have an objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Now, Dr. Kwan, what symptoms was Ms. Patrio exhibiting?
Well, Dr. Kwan noted slurred speech, stomach cramps, tightness in chest, nausea, and vomiting, specifically with Ms. Rodriguez noting similar effects after the dinner. And as you can see from this chart, these are consistent with the 0.16 to 0.25% BAC range, which would fall in that dark orange high-risk range.
Well, what does that high-risk range mean?
Well, given we don't know what Patria's peak BAC was that night, And given Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16%, and after a long period of time could have fell in the high risk range, it's also possible that Petrillo was previously in the severe impairment range, that being 0.26 to 0.35% BAC.
Thank you, Ms. John. You may remove the exhibit. Moving on, what were other alternatives for cause of death?
It's possible Petrillo had an allergic reaction. Prior medical history doesn't support this. It's also possible hepatic disease played a role in her death, but again, this isn't very likely. The final possibility is just that the pesticide that Petrillo consumed didn't come from the car bottle of wine.
Well, I'd like to talk to you about the possibility that the pesticide didn't come from the Cara bottle. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, while I don't deny that there was pesticide found in the Cara bottle, there's no way to definitively prove that the Cara bottle contained pesticides when Petrillo was drinking the wine.
Why is there no way to prove the Cara bottle contained pesticides when Ms. Petrillo consumed it?
Well, the bottle was tested 2 days after Petrillo drank it, and this gives the bottle 2 days of unaccounted time, where it could have been contaminated by another source.
And how could it have been contaminated?
I mean, a multitude of things are possible. The methodology in the testing could have had malpractice, or if hypothetically the bottle was thrown in a dumpster that contained pesticides, it would have been contaminated there. If any of these things happened, it would be highly unlikely the bottle was the source of the pesticide that Petrillo contained.
Are there any other reasons you disagree with Dr. Kwan?
If the bottle was indeed contaminated when Petrillo drank it, I would disagree with him.
And could you explain why you would disagree with him?
Yeah, so Dr. Kwan mentions that the smallest dose of organophosphate exposure is lethal, and I learned that Angel Rodriguez drank from the bottle and said they spat it out. It's suspicious, then, that Angel Rodriguez didn't experience any symptoms of pesticide poisoning, given what Dr. Kwan said about skin contact being lethal.
Dr. Cannon, after reviewing Dr. Kwan's report, do you agree with his overall conclusion?
While I would agree Dr. Kwan's overall conclusion is possible, there are alternatives and equally valid conclusions that weren't really considered by Dr. Kwan.
And after utilizing your methods, what are your overall conclusions in today's case?
While there's affirmative evidence that Petrillo experienced organophosphate poisoning of some kind, the negative evidence shows other alternatives like BAC or allergic reaction. And similarly, there's no affirmative evidence the Cara bottle was contaminated when Petrillo drank the wine.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, let's begin by talking about the stake you have in today's case. You work at Gardner Consulting, right?
Yes.
And one of the biggest clients of your firm is Detsky Roach and Roby Killer.
Yes.
That company makes chemical pesticides.
Yes.
The CEO of that company actually reached out to you when he found out you were testifying today, right?
Yes, he did.
He told you that it's extremely important if you want to continue having their business that a pesticide not be found responsible for the death of Genesis Petrillo.
He did say that?
And you admit to not wanting to lose Detsky as a client, correct?
No one wants to lose a client, but the thing is, I did overall find that organophosphate poisoning was the most likely cause of death, and that's why I included it in my affidavit, or in my report, because I wanted to be fully transparent and provide an objective take on what happened.
Okay, Dr. Cannon, I want to make something extremely clear for the jury. You did not conclude that alcohol poisoning was the most likely cause of death for Genesis Petrillo, correct?
Not alcohol poisoning. Yeah, I didn't conclude alcohol poisoning was the most likely cause.
Well, let's talk about what kind of data you relied on to come to your conclusion today. Genesis Petrillo's BAC was 0.16 at the time it was taken, correct?
Yes.
And that was nowhere close to fatal.
Nothing from what I've seen.
In fact, Petrillo's BAC would have to be at least 0.30 to even compare with the lowest end of alcohol-related deaths you've ever seen.
Yes, and that's why I specifically talked about the metabolization of the body and the recorded BAC of at the time when Petrillo was tested.
Well, Dr. Cannon, there's actually no affirmative evidence that Petrillo's BAC was at least 0.30, right?
Right, and that's why I stated in my direct that it was negative evidence that led to this.
Dr. Kane, I'm not asking about negative evidence. I'm asking specifically about affirmative evidence. And there's none to prove that her BAC was at least 0.30.
Right, yes.
There's no affirmative evidence that her BAC even approached that number, correct?
No.
So let's talk about what you did conclude after considering all this lack of affirmative evidence. You found it highly unlikely that Petrillo died just because of alcohol poisoning, right?
Yes.
You find it also highly unlikely that pesticides have nothing to do with Petrillo's death.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about some evidence that alcohol poisoning itself can't explain away.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol poisoning itself can't explain the pesticide in Petrillo's blood, right?
Right.
And alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticide in Petrillo's stomach.
Right. And that's why I found pesticide poisoning to be the most likely cause of death.
Okay, then let's talk about what you can conclude about the wine in today's case. You noted the presence of both wine and pesticide in Petrillo's stomach contents, right?
Yes, from Dr. Kwan's report.
And Dr. Kwan, he didn't report any throat burns on Genesis.
I don't believe so.
There weren't any rashes on her skin.
No.
That means that Genesis had to ingest the pesticide with something else.
Yes.
Like wine.
Like wine or any other food, yes.
The only thing that was identified in her stomach contents was wine.
I believe so, but I also believe Dr. Kwan mentioned that all the stomach contents were churned up together.
Well, you actually found this compelling evidence that the wine was contaminated with pesticide, right?
Right, because the stomach churns up all the contents together, so everything would have been contaminated at that point, yes.
I'm not asking about everything. I'm asking if you found this as compelling evidence that the wine itself was contaminated with pesticide, and you did.
Yes.
And so you concluded that Genesis ingested contaminated wine, right?
I found it to be the most likely cause, but there isn't scientific certainty in regard to it.
But it is the most likely cause, correct?
Most likely out of the alternatives, sure.
Well, let's talk about all those alternatives you considered today. You performed a comparative analysis method, right?
Yes.
And for this method, you looked at all the necessary materials.
Yes.
You examined the doctor's treatment records,
Mm-hmm.
the toxicology report,
Mm-hmm.
the trio stomach contents.
Mm-hmm.
You even considered more possibilities than Dr. Kwan did, right?
Yes, that's standard in the field of consulting.
And even after considering all these different possibilities, you still concluded the wine produced by Harper Martini was the most likely cause of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, it's the most likely, but, I mean, as I said in my report, there's a lot of inconsistencies in regard to Angel Rodriguez and the wine that make me doubt it. But, again, in regard to affirmative evidence, it is the most likely, but not more valid by the others. Or not more certain, sorry.
Dr. Hannah, I just want to make this clear for the jury. You are agreeing with me that the wine produced by Harper Martini is the most likely cause of pesticide poisoning, right?
Most likely, sure.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right. Defense may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense now calls Ms. Blair Osborne.
All right. Ms. Osborne?
Hello.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne.
And Ms. Osborne, why are you here today?
Well, I'm here today because I was actually hired to plan the wedding for Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo on June 8th of 2019. I was actually hired by Harper Martini.
And how much experience do you have running weddings?
Well, I own my own event planning service called Bliss by Blair Events, and we started almost a decade ago, so I can't even tell you how many weddings we've done since then. I'm secretly a hopeless romantic, so they're kind of my favorite events to do. We've even won a bunch of awards for it.
Can you tell us more about your relationship with Harper Martini?
Sure. So when I first met Harper, I had just started my business and I wasn't very good at it. I would double book things all the time. And one day Harper helped me out with one of these events that I had double booked. And ever since then, we've had a great professional relationship.
I'd like to talk about the wedding planning itself now. When did you first become involved?
Well, Harper hired me several months in advance to plan the wedding. Casey and Genesis didn't know I was involved at first, but eventually they found out, and I was so excited to work with them. I always feel like Jennifer Lopez in the movie The Wedding Planner.
You mentioned that Miss Soto and Miss Petrillo were not involved in the wedding planning at first. Why was that?
Well, wedding planning is a lot of work and can sometimes put a lot of stress on the happy couple, so I was just hired to get things running in a professional way.
Can you tell us about the planning of the wedding once the bride and groom were involved?
Yeah. So I met with Genesis and Casey in January of 2019 to discuss all the fun stuff for the wedding, like the reception, the ceremony, the rehearsal dinner. We did run into a few complications along the way, partially because of my fault, but luckily we figured everything out before I met with Harper later on in the coming months.
I'd like to talk about that meeting you had with Mr. Martini. How did that go?
So it actually was Harper, me, and Casey. We met to discuss the decor options, and it was going really well, but then things got a little bit awkward after Harper played a voicemail that he got from Genesis, where Genesis sounded pretty drunk.
How did the two of them respond after Mr. Martini played this email, or this voicemail, excuse me?
Well, Casey literally walked right out of the room. He seemed pretty upset, and Harper even said something along the lines like Genesis would drink something wrong and it would kill her. I was a little worried how drunk she sounded, but luckily I didn't see everyone again until June 7th.
I'd like to talk about the day of the rehearsal dinner. What happened then?
Yeah, so that was actually June 7th of 2019. During the day, it seemed that Genesis and Harper had gotten into a bit of a disagreement, but that all seemed to be put aside once we actually got to the rehearsal dinner because Harper seemed like he was really trying to bury the hatchet.
What made it seem like Mr. Martini was trying to bury the hatchet?
Well, he gave a wonderful speech in the middle of the rehearsal dinner and even gave Genesis this beautiful bottle of Cara wine as a gift. I started tearing up because of how beautiful it was. It made me hope that I got a father-in-law like that one day.
What, if anything, did you see happen after Mr. Martini gave Miss Petrillo that bottle of wine?
Well, I'm pretty sure that I saw Genesis open the bottle of wine and drink a couple of glasses. I left at around 10:15 that night, and so after that, I did see Genesis still drinking with her friends at the cocktail bar. Of course, it wasn't until the next day that I found out about Genesis's passing.
And what do you know about Miss Petrillo's passing?
All I know is that Harper's being accused of having something to do with it, which I absolutely can't believe. Harper would never do anything to hurt Casey, and poisoning Genesis would have done just that.
I'd like to talk about the bottle of Cara wine for a moment. Did you ever see Mr. Martini put anything into that bottle of wine?
No, I never saw anything like that.
Did you ever see Mr. Martini with both the pesticides and the wine on hand?
No, I never saw that.
Did you ever even see Mr. Martini with pesticides?
Not once.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you hear me all right, Ms. Osborne?
I can, yeah.
All right. I just have a few questions for you tonight. Now, you've hosted 83 events at Peony Estates.
Yes, and 100 at Dave & Buster's.
So Peony Estates, it's a pretty big source of income for you.
I guess so.
And in fact, you made over $22,000 just off of the Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo wedding itself.
Yeah, I did, which is actually a pretty small amount in comparison to some of my other events.
Now, I want to talk about how that wedding planning went a little bit. Now, when you and Harper first met to discuss the wedding, you were surprised by a lot of what Harper had to say.
Occasionally, yeah.
For example, Harper made it clear that Casey and Genesis, they didn't know yet that you had been hired.
That's right. At first, they didn't know I was involved.
And you were actually pretty uncomfortable about not telling Casey about your role in planning her wedding.
At first, I was.
But Harper was willing to pay you an extra 15% to stay discreet, right?
Yeah, which I thought was kind of dumb because they ended up finding out anyways.
So as the wedding planning went on, Harper and Genesis, they both continued to contact you separately, right?
They did.
And you were also constantly receiving conflicting information about the wedding details.
Yes, I was. It was so annoying.
But you did your best to keep everyone happy, I'm sure.
Absolutely, that was my job.
But there was still a lot of crying and fighting.
Whining. Yeah, no one was actually crying.
Well, between everyone's emotions and all of the logistical problems, you actually thought that this wedding was doomed from the start, didn't you?
I did, yeah. There were a lot of complications, and sometimes they were my fault too.
All right. Now, on May 11th, 2019, the members of the wedding party, they threw a party that you really didn't have anything to do with, right?
No, I wasn't involved in any of the planning, nor was I present.
Okay. A few days later, you were meeting with Harper and Casey to finalize some wedding details, though, right?
The decor options, yeah.
But at that meeting, Harper and Casey, they just sat in silence there in front of you.
Yes, it was very awkward, and as I was like flipping through pictures of bouquets and stuff. They weren't even listening to me.
Then suddenly, Harper pulled out his phone and started to play a voice message from Genesis, right?
That's right.
Now, I know you may not remember exactly what that voice message said, but it was a terrible voice message. You remember that.
I remember how drunk Genesis sounded, yeah.
But redirecting back to my question, the voice message itself, it was terrible.
Yeah, especially because of how she sounded.
And when the message was done playing, Harper said, "One of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis."
Yeah, I was worried too about what she had drank that night.
All right, now let's talk about the evening of the rehearsal dinner for just a minute. You were there that night.
I was, yes.
Now, later in the night, Harper presented Genesis with a bottle of wine from Peony Estates.
That's true.
And when Harper gave that bottle to Genesis, he said, "I got this just for you."
That's what he said.
He said, "Don't open it in front of other people."
Yeah, which was weird because he did open it in front of everyone.
And he said, "I want this special bottle to be just for you when you have a private moment to reflect on everything that you have done."
Yep, and it wasn't very private at all.
Well, a month prior to that, Harper had predicted this exact thing, right?
I'm not so sure what you mean.
Well, Harper did say Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis, didn't he?
Oh, that's what you mean. I don't know if those are related at all, actually.
But he said that, right, Miss Osborne?
Said what?
That Genesis will drink the wrong thing someday and that it will kill Genesis.
Oh, later, earlier, not on June 7th, like we were just talking about.
Thank you, Miss Osborne. No further questions.
All right, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. At this point, we would ask that our witness be allowed to step down, and the defense would like to rest our case in chief.
All right. All right, do both sides rest and close?
Yes, Your Honor. We ask, if time allowing, for a brief 5-minute recess before closing argument.
That's great.
Okay.
All right, our break is up. Are both sides ready for closing argument?
Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready for closing arguments.
All right, plaintiff, before we begin, I want to see if you want to reserve any time for rebuttal of final.
Yes, ma'am. I'll reserve 1 minute for rebuttal if possible.
All right, that's agreeable. Are both sides ready?
May I inquire as to how much time I have for my closing and rebuttal?
You have 6 minutes and 20 seconds total, 5 minutes and 20 for your closing and 1 minute for your rebuttal.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, plaintiff, you may proceed.
Absolutely. May it please the court. The defendant lost control, but Genesis lost her life. Now, the defendant threatened to poison Genesis Petrillo. Just 1 week later, Genesis was dead from pesticide poisoning. There's no way to twist this, ladies and gentlemen. You heard the defendant's words. Miserable, selfish Genesis, I've had enough. One of these days, Genesis is going to drink the wrong thing and die. Instead of walking down the aisle toward her fiancé, Genesis was sitting in a hospital bed until pesticides made their way into her bloodstream. Before Casey even made it to say goodbye, she was gone. Now, as much as the defense wants this to be out of the defendant's hands, this was no accident. From the moment that Genesis stepped into the defendant's life, he was looking for a way to get rid of her. Because when the defendant says, "My mind is spinning, I'm beyond the breaking point, it's going to be me or Genesis, not both," the defendant had made up his mind. Now, the defendant lost control, but it was Genesis who lost her life. Now, you saw the voicemail that threw the defendant over the edge. You heard that Genesis pushed the defendant's limits over and over and over again. Now, in an effort to stop Genesis from taking away everything that he loved, the defendant laid down an ultimatum. I will take you out the hard way. And that expired on June 7th, the night Genesis was killed. Now, the defendant, well beyond what they admit was their breaking point, was alone in the kitchen with a bottle of wine in one hand and a bottle of pesticide in the other. He turned to the nearest caterer at the rehearsal dinner and gave them instructions that the bottle must only be drunk by Genesis. Hours later, Genesis was in the hospital. Without a moment to spare, the defendant walked into Genesis' room, picked up the wine bottle he was so familiar with, peeled off the label so as to cover his tracks, and threw it in the trash. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the evidence, and now you have to answer a question. Is justice being served? You are called here to determine if, by preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, the defendant is liable for battery against Genesis Petrillo. Now, in order to answer this question, we proved 3 elements to you. Now, the first element we proved was that the defendant intended to cause harm to Genesis. Now, this may have been difficult to prove with another set of evidence, but when the defendant says a note to the victim telling them that they will take them out the hard way, this wasn't just an accident. The second element that we proved was that the defendant followed through with their threat and poisoned that Cara bottle of wine. Well, Sam Arnold answered this question when they saw the defendant alone with a bottle of wine in the kitchen and a bottle of pesticides on the counter. And finally, we showed you that Ms. Petrillo suffered harm as a consequence of the defendant's actions. Out of everything that needed to be proven today, this was the most obvious. Because the death certificate of Genesis Petrillo does not say that she died from alcohol poisoning. It says she died from pesticide poisoning. Now, at the end of the day, we're not just looking at an allegation of spilling some pesticides on the ground. A woman's life was taken from her on her wedding day. She drank what she thought and what should have been a harmless bottle of wine. And today we're here to promote justice. Justice for the life ripped from Casey and her bride. the children they would have, and the future that was stolen. Now, I want to be very clear. You don't have to be 100% certain of the defendant's actions. In order to preserve justice, you only need to believe, more likely than not, that the defendant lost control and that those three elements of battery are true. Now, you and your fellow jury members have the responsibility and the wisdom to make the right decision. I trust that. Now, you have the responsibility to follow the witness testimony and the evidence to a verdict. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence has been very clear. So let's straight to the defendant. So when asked if Harper Martini is liable for battery against Genesis Petrillo, I want you to look past the distractions the defense tried to show you. Because when the defendant lost control, it was Genesis Petrillo who lost your life. It's for this reason that we ask for a verdict of justice. A verdict of liable for battery against Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. False accusations and faulty examinations. Today's trial has been fraught with these from beginning to end. The false accusations of the plaintiff that Mr. Martini was somehow involved in the untimely and unfortunate death of Miss Genesis Petrillo, and the faulty examinations of Genesis Petrillo by Dr. Jimin Kwan and of the bottle of Cara wine that was found in the dumpster behind Peony Estates. We have seen in today's trial that the defendant Harper Martini was not involved in this untimely death, and that therefore he should not be considered liable for battery against Genesis Petrillo. The burden of proof for a battery case is that of a preponderance of evidence. It is the duty of the plaintiff to prove each of the three prongs of battery, that they are more likely to have occurred than not in today's case, each and every one of those prongs. Once again, those three prongs are: first, that there was an act by the defendant; second, that there was harmful intent on behalf of the defendant; and third and finally, that there was actual harmful contact done to the plaintiff by the defendant. Let's begin by discussing the first prong of battery. Members of the jury, we saw that there was clearly not an act by the defendant in today's case. Mr. Martini did not poison Mr. Petrillo. From the testimony of Mr. Martini, we saw that there was a clear reason for the pesticide's presence in the wine bottle. The fact that it was thrown away in the same dumpster as multiple partially empty bottles of this pesticide. And though it tested positive for this pesticide, there is no reason to assume that it was therefore in the bottle of wine when it was drunk by Miss Genesis Petrillo. This piece of evidence was also corroborated by Dr. Rex Cannon, who further explained that it was likely as a result to have occurred after, when it was in this trash can, than before Miss Petrillo actually drank that bottle. So we've seen that Mr. Martini was not only responsible, or Mr. Martini threw the bottle of wine into the garbage, and there it must have been contaminated, but additionally, that Miss Osborne testified that she never once even saw Mr. Martini in the same place as both the bottle of Cara wine and the pesticides that have been alleged to have caused this particular battery. Miss Arnold, who was also called, was never able to testify that she actually saw Mr. Martini put this pesticide within the bottle of Cara wine. She never saw Mr. Martini put anything into this bottle of Cara wine, and additionally was able to essentially show that there were alternate possibilities for the actual cause of pesticide within this bottle of wine if it was there, the messy conditions at Peony Estates. And as a result, Mr. Martini would not be considered responsible for placing those pesticides within the bottle of wine. But we also saw that there was no harmful intent on behalf of Mr. Martini. We have heard from Mr. Martini himself that despite the arguments he had with Genesis Petrillo, he was working towards resolving those issues with him because he cared about Miss Petrillo, because he cared about his daughter, Miss Casey Soto. And he cared about their relationship. And he cared that he was able to keep that relationship with Miss Soto going no matter what, even if it required swallowing his pride and burying the hatchet with Miss Petrillo. He gave Miss Petrillo the gift of a bottle of Carl wine as an extension of the olive branch that was witnessed by Miss Osborne and considered to be genuine and heartfelt by Miss Soto herself, who came here today to even testify against her father. But lastly, we saw that there was no actual harmful contact done to Mr. Petrillo by Mr. Martini. We heard from Dr. Cannon, an incredibly qualified and experienced toxicologist who reviewed the testimony of Dr. Jimin Kwan. By applying reliable and widely used methods of examination, Dr. Cannon examined several alternative conclusions that could be drawn from Genesis Petrillo's symptoms. These included alcohol poisoning, hepatic disease, an allergic reaction, or an alternate source of the pesticides. Dr. Cannon also concluded that it was incredibly likely, based on the nature of the human body, that Miss Petrillo's blood alcohol content was much higher than it was when she was actually received in the hospital by Dr. Jimin Kwan. And as a result, we cannot rule out the possibility of alcohol poisoning in today's case. Not only that, but Dr. Cannon noted importantly that if Dr. Jimin Kwan was correct in his assertion that it was pesticide that killed Miss Petrillo, that it would have had to also harm Miss Angel Rodriguez, who held the pesticides within her mouth for a short period of time, and yet had no visible signs of harm from those pesticides. So we can naturally conclude then that it is reasonably unlikely that the cause of death of Miss Petrillo was that of pesticide poisoning. We can see that Mr. Martini clearly did not take the action, attempted to resolve the difficulties in his relationship with Miss Petrillo for Miss Soto's sake and for his business's sake, and that there were many alternate causes to the death of Miss Petrillo. But members of the jury, the plaintiff simply has not met their burden in today's trial. The charge of battery against Harper Martini has been based on false accusations and faulty examinations. But members of the jury, if there's anything that I want you to remember at the end of today's trial, it was that not a single witness, not a single individual was able to tell you that they saw Mr. Martini put the pesticides within that bottle of Carl wine. And as a result, you cannot conclude that he was liable. I ask you, in this case of which is more likely, what is more likely? That Mr. Martini intentionally put these pesticides within the bottle of Carl wine and that hundreds of wedding guests never even noticed it? Or that it was simply contaminated in the dumpster behind Peony Estates? We ask you to find Mr. Martini not liable for battery against Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
All right, plaintiff, you may close.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. The defendant lost control, but it was Genesis who lost her life. The defense tried to tell you that this is somehow a faulty accusation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer an accusation. It's the truth. Somehow, someway, pesticides got into Miss Petrillo's drink, and the defendant is the only one with the motive and the ability to do such a thing. Ladies and gentlemen, when the defense says false examinations, the only false examinations were conducted by the defense themselves. Because when they misquoted Dr. Kwan in order to build their case, by twisting his words, like when they said another person drank the same wine as Genesis, they lost all credibility, folks. Now, throughout trial, the defense is throwing around plenty of distractions. But right now, let's focus on what matters. We must come to a verdict of justice, a verdict of liable. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you, everyone. I'll ask Judge Ritchie and Judge Koenig to submit their ballots and let me know when that's done. Thank you to both sides.
Thank you for judging.
You're very welcome.
I'm having a hard time getting mine submitted. It's filled out, but for whatever reason, it won't submit.
Okay. Imagine that, technical difficulties. I know you have to type submit and then type.
Oh, that might be why.
Type the word in and then click it. I don't think you could just like hit enter. You have to type the word.
Okay, it's done. I apologize.
No
It was
problem.
definitely user error.
Likewise, I'm finished.
Okay. All right. Let me let Mr. Riches know. It was not clear if we text or email, so I'm going to do both. All right, so we are submitted. Judge Koenig, Judge Ritchie, who would like to go first on comments? Any preference?
No preference here. Miss
All
Rich
right.
or Miss McCormick.
All right, Judge Ritchie, how about you go first?
Well, I really don't have very many comments. I think y'all all did great, and I can't believe how great y'all did in the challenging circumstances of a virtual mock trial. So y'all had a lot going on with sharing screens, and I think y'all all did great. A couple of you, the hands were a little bit distracting, but I don't know that they would have been if we were in person. It's just, you know, where you are in connection with the screen. So I really think y'all all did really good.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead then.
All right.
I know I probably look more like one of you guys than I do a judge, but I'm a second-year law student at Wake Forest University, and I did mock trial through all 4 years of undergrad. I'm on the national trial team at Wake, and I'll try to keep the comments broad because like I know it's late, and I know I hate getting comments during a round, but I'll just say for both you guys, for both teams, I think you guys need to rework your theories and your themes. So the themes that I got were from the defense, false accusations and false examinations, and then from the plaintiff, lost control and Genesis Petrillo lost. Was it her life? Her life. Okay. With regards to the plaintiff, I feel like you guys could sculpt a theme and a theory that's a little more specific to this case. I say this because I helped coach the Wake Forest team, and this is the same theme we used for last year's case as well. It was, for those of you who remember, it was Jordan Ryder lost control and Parker Page lost her life. So as soon as I heard that, I thought to myself, well, yes, there are similarities in these cases, but I think you get to something that's a little more specific. And then with regards to the defense, I get what you're trying to go through here with the false accusations, false examinations. It makes sense. But throughout your cross examinations, I kept thinking to myself, what points are they trying to make here? And I got it by the end that you were going for this alcohol poisoning. But I think in your opening and in your theory and your theme, you need to be right up front and say, this is what this case is about, right? Not something that like rhymes and sounds good, but just be like, this case is about alcohol poisoning. Obviously put it a lot better than I just put it, make it sound good. But make really clear what story you're going to tell. Like I said with the plaintiffs, get specific so I know exactly what story you guys are going to be telling. And besides that, I've submitted some comments in the Google form, and they'll be more specific. But those are the biggest things I wanted to cover. Good job. It was a good trial. I guess we'll find out who you guys are when we get the okay from Elliot that the ballots are good. Sorry, Ms. McCormick, do you have anything to say?
I just wanted to tell everyone, congratulations. You guys did such a good job. I guess I'm the OG here. I'm a Baylor alum a million years ago, back before it was the Palace on the Brazos, back when it was just some shack on campus. I'm a former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, so I was thrilled when y'all decided to do the battery. So great way to craft a story. Like Judge Koenig was saying, trials are about stories. The person who tells the best story wins the case. And so it was a very good way to find a good story. And what a good case to find a story. I mean, you have someone that murdered the bride on her wedding day. I mean, it was a murder, right? I mean, they murdered her with a bottle of wine, her wedding present. Her father-in-law or mother-in-law, I guess, murdered her. And so great plaintiff story. And then the defense, y'all did a really good job at showing he's just a slob and, threw the bottle of wine in some dumpster in the back. And so he's just a bad businessman. He's not a killer. In terms of the direct, I thought each and every one of you did a very good job staying on point, making your points and getting out, not spending too much time just wallowing around in what you didn't need to wallow around in. The cross-examination, everyone that did cross-examination, I just want to say congratulations. Cross-examination is an art. And you all did better than many of the very experienced attorneys I have seen in the courtroom. You managed to keep the witnesses on point. You controlled the questioning. And so very good. You guys are head and shoulders above, a lot of very experienced attorneys. The person that played Sam Arnold, I think that was Miss Caldwell. You get the Oscar for the evening. Not only were you a great witness, but good staging. Loved the bottle of wine and the flowers in the back. You were a terrific witness. The two gentlemen who did the argument, y'all did a really good job at presenting your story. Mr. Shiner, you did the argument for the defense. You did very good at drawing the elements in and putting your argument in terms of the elements, how the plaintiff did not prove them. And plaintiff's closing, tell me your last name again.
Cameron,
I'm sorry, Mr. Cameron, you did a very good job of coming back and using his words against him. And I think that's what rebuttal is for, leaving that last word, when that jury's about to walk out and go in the last room, you want your words in their ear. When those 12 people go in and sit down, that's what you want them to remember. So very good job, everybody. Congratulations. I could tell each of you worked very hard at this.
thank you so much for presiding.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you all for judging.
You're welcome. You got that first round under your belt now.
Are we allowed to know what school you guys are at this point?
I think we have to wait to get confirmation that the ballots are totally okay. I don't believe that Elliot will be coming in and telling us that. So I think it's up to us to text him and be like, are we okay? And then we can tell you where we're from.
Okay, well, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to hold you guys any later.
Well, any questions or any other comments?
Congratulations, you guys.
Thank you all for judging. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
You
right,
too.
get
Thank
good
you.
sleep.